Good morning, Mr. Chair. This is Andy, policy analyst with the division. I just got an email from Melissa asking if it would be all right if I took the role instead of her today.
Say it again.
Melissa just emailed me and asked if it would be all right if I took the role today.
Sure.
I will go ahead and do that. Gordon Angelo.
I'm here.
James Austin. Right. Sounds like he may have been delayed. Forrest Barnes is going to be late. John Cameller.
Here.
Rich Fry.
I'm here.
Emily Kemper.
Here.
Douglas Leffen.
Here.
Rich Tovar.
Here.
Eli Boland.
Here.
And Ribai Tamarhule.
Here.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We have a quorum.
Good morning, everybody. Welcome to our first board meetings of 2020, and Happy New Year. For the record, Rabbi Tamarhudet, acting chair, call for the virtual meeting of the Residential Manufacturing Structure Board of January 6, 2021, started at 9:35. So we just go ahead to item C of the agenda 1, and we go ahead and we have the agenda. You guys, if you have any change or of the order of the agenda or any requests for any change? If none, I just acting chair, rule the agenda and order of business approved. In the board document, we have received the draft minute of meeting October 7, 2020. Are there any corrections or additions or amendment to the draft document?
Rabbi, you have a real minor correction on page 4 of the minutes. Second to last paragraph, last sentence was capturing a comment I made about removing the heat recovery ventilation requirements because 75 to 80% of new homes have ductless systems. That should say ducted.
Any other comments from the members? Okay. If there are no more corrections, I acting chair rule the draft minutes of October 7 are final as amended with the comments from Ali. We move to item E. Our next meeting is scheduled for April 7, 2021. We move to item 2, the public comment. Mr. Bolton, do we have any requests for oral testimony?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Andy Bolton, policy analyst with the division. We have not received any requests for general public comment. We have received requests for comment on one specific agenda item, and those comments will be heard along with that agenda item. If there is anyone else on the call right now that wishes to provide just general public testimony to the board that has not already submitted a request, please go ahead and identify yourself now.
Okay.
All right. Doesn't sound like we have anyone. So yeah, no general public comment. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Move on to the next item. It's the reports. I would like to invite Tony Rocco, Structure Chief, to give us the residential structural program update.
Good morning, and thank you, members of the board. For the record, Tony Rocco with the division. Several items this morning to update the board on before over to Mr. Heiser for a residential reach code update. So the first thing to update the board on is our team is looking forward to finalizing the 2021 ORSC through the public rulemaking process and subsequent publishing process. And as part of that, we're also in the initial stages of compiling code change information for developing training for our local government partners. And as you all know, there's some great changes recommended by the board in the upcoming code. And finally, on a brief note, we have a new technical bulletin posted on our residential structures program webpage, which is accessible through our division's homepage. And that bulletin covers common application questions around uniform alternate construction standards. So look for that on our webpage. And if acceptable to you, Mr. Chairman, I'll just move on to an update about Chapter 1.
Okay, go ahead.
Thank you. So to give you some background on Chapter 1, our division has been working diligently on aligning the administrative provisions of the ORSC with those of the OSSC over the past year. And the intent is to help foster predictable application and further clarify our delegable authority for our local government partners. The current Chapter 1 draft of the ORSC has been discussed in detail with our local government partners since September and includes various modifications from input that they have provided to us. And this is in your packet, the current version of Chapter 1 draft. So a quick summary for the board regarding this administrative alignment. The majority of the alignment occurs in section R101, which is the section of the code. And within that section, our scoping policy is aligned with the current 2019 OSSC and further clarified. And it includes a reorganization of residential dwelling uses covered by the construction standards of the ORSC and those other non-traditional residential dwelling uses that are more appropriately served by the construction standards of the OSSC. You'll see that identified in section R101 as well. Flexibility is outlined for local policymakers to consider regarding local regulation of certain unoccupied structures, such as fences and flagpoles, where the value added component of such local regulation is considered essential to meet their community specific needs. So providing a lot of flexibility for them to consider there. And it also identifies a list of commonly questioned matters that may appear in nationally adopted model codes or elsewhere in other construction standards, but fall outside of our division's delegable authority. And some examples are abatement of nuisances and dangerous buildings. There's some statutory language on that, independent from this. Demolition activity regulation, floating structures, and residential driveways. I felt like those were some good examples for the board to get a picture of what we're talking about there. Throughout the chapter, we clarify that nothing in the state building code limits a local municipality's ability to adopt, enact, or enforce its own local ordinances. And this has been something that's come into question quite frequently in the past. So now we are clarifying that, and you'll see that basically a reoccurring statement capturing that throughout portions of the draft chapter. And this would, I guess the exception to this is obviously where the ordinance, the local ordinance is preempted by the state building code, and someone could reference ORS 45040 for that. But again, this is a common reoccurring question, and we're trying to hopefully just provide helpful guidance to our local government partners. The chapter, the draft changes also provide guidance to the local municipalities regarding authorities that they may wish to pursue locally, which are not delegated or obtained through our division. And some examples of these authorities that have been discussed at length in the last months are right of entry, stop work orders, and service utility disconnection orders. We also align general concepts and allowances of damage correction to those that have long existed in the OSSC. And in that alignment regarding damage correction, we also capture reconstruction safeguard and energy requirements that are mandated when considering, damage correction from an unavoidable circumstance that caused damage to the dwelling. And then most significantly, I'd say the provisions reinforce the broad discretionary authority afforded to local building officials and summarizes the flexibility available to them when administering the code in their jurisdiction. One of the related changes details the ability for the building official to work with their local customers to approve alternate means regarding inspection recording methods, which seems probably like an insignificant item, but for some and for contractors, it's often kind of a headache to have that physical card on site, to always keep track of the physical card. So now we've provided clear language in there that would afford a local building official working with their local contractors and customers to develop a policy that would satisfy the same intent, but maybe it would be an electronic means, for example, of recording those inspections that are handled at site. And you can reference section R116 for that. Pretty clear language on the flexibility there. And with that, that's kind of a high-level summary of the purpose. This will be going to a rulemaking in the near future, public rulemaking hearing. And I'd welcome any questions or feedback from the board before turning it over to Mark Heiser for a residential reach code update. Thank you.
And Tony?
Yeah.
This chapter will appear in the next code.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Again, for the record, Tony Rocco with the division. Yes, the anticipated timeline is to have the ORSC Chapter I adopted as a portion and published as a portion of the 21 ORSC with that anticipated effective date of April 1 of this year. And then on the OSSC side, it would be very similar timeline, but it would be an interim amendment for Chapter I of that code.
Do you have any question for Tony? If not, you're welcome, Mike.
All right. Thank you, Chair Tamarellit and members of the board. For the record, Mark Heiser with the division today, giving an update on the reach code process. Wanted to let the board know that the division put out a request for proposals for ideas for inclusion in the 2021 residential reach code. We received items from 8 separate proponents. The division has been reviewing those and reaching out to the proponents. Next Wednesday, January 13th, the division will be holding a meeting where we're going to sort of go down the list of items. A few of the proposals are similar in nature, and we've reached out to see whether we can find some commonalities between the proposals to maybe have a more consensus document to put before you for one of the paths. There are other performance component paths looked at for the reach code. And so we will go from that meeting to try and finalize, sort of put together a proposal for a reach code for the 2021 residential version and bring that both to the SEEB and to the residential board in the near future. Any questions from?
This is Rich Fry. I have one question. Has there been any further discussion about the local municipalities being able to adopt this as their standard code?
There's currently an LC I know that is out there, and there's always been ORS 455-040, where just like any other code provision, any jurisdiction can approach the division and go through a standard already in statute process to be able to do local adoption. But no one did that with the last REACH code, but there's still the possibility in the future for this next version. So
Okay,
thank you.
Great. Thank you very much.
Through the chair, this is Emily. I have a question for Mark. Thank you for that update. I was just curious, you said that a call for like proposals had been opened. Is that closed, or are you still accepting ideas?
The call for basic proposals is closed, but we are also again having the meeting next week. All of the ideas are posted on the division website, the proposals that came in. Again, we're going to be reaching out other proponents who have seen may want to make comments during that period next week, and we're sort of doing the public outreach to see more. So there's still the possibility for more input, but we're planning on taking the proposals that came in from people like NIA, the Zero Energy Coalition, and others, and putting a final product out to bring back.
Okay, great. Thank you for the update, Mark.
Any more questions to Mark?
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Well, let's go to the next item, communication. We have none, appeals, none, unfinished business, none. Item 7 is the new business. We have a request for a change to a table in Chapter 11. I will give the floor to Andy for presentation. Andy, we cannot hear you.
Sorry, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Andy Bolton, policy analyst for the division. For some background, the board appointed a code committee to review the Oregon Residential Specialty Code on July 8th. It is July 8th, 2020 meeting, and the committee met 3 times in August. It reviewed and took testimony on drafting the 2021 Oregon Residential Specialty Code. The committee discussed and took testimony regarding changes to the additional measures table, table N1101.1, parens 2. During the discussion, the Zero Coalition proposed adding additional measures to the table and altering the number of additional measures that are required using a sliding scale based on home size. Ultimately, the committee declined to change the number of required additional measures, but did adopt 2 of the proposed additions. One of the 2 additions, measure 7, gave credit for homes that capped the glazing area to less than 12% of the conditioned floor area. The committee provided its recommendation to the board, and the board approved the proposed Oregon Residential Specialty Code at its October 7th, 2020 meeting. The Zero Coalition has requested the opportunity to testify before the board to ask that additional measure 7 be removed from the additional measures table. David Heslin is here representing the Zero Coalition. Eric Lacey is here representing Responsible Energy Codes Alliance and has also requested the opportunity to testify. Shilpa Sarana is also here representing the Northwest Energy Alliance and has requested the opportunity to testify as well. And as you know, we also have Mark Heiser from the division here to field any technical questions from the board.
Thank you. Let's go to testimony. Start with David. Is David available? How about Eric?
Yes, I'm.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for the opportunity to speak. I'm Eric Lacey. I chair the Responsible Energy Codes Alliance, and we go around the country and promote the adoption of the latest version of the IECC and beyond where it's appropriate. And I'll say Oregon has long led the way in coming up with innovative new ideas to get a little more energy efficiency out of the code. And so, you know, you all should be commended for that. It might surprise you then that I'm here to support the Zero Coalition's proposal to eliminate this credit for low glazing area, because all things held equal, it seems like a house with, you know, less glazing area would save energy over a house with more glazing area. But there are a few reasons why we think that this particular option should not be in the 2021 Residential Specialty Code. It's been proposed, something like this, or trade-offs for low glazing area have been proposed at the national level several times. They've been rejected every time, and I'm not aware of any other state that gives credit for low glazing area like this for a variety of reasons. The first reason is we think that it's very likely that this would just be a free ridership credit. I think it would be extremely rare for builders to reduce the glazing area on a home for the sake of saving energy. Oftentimes, a home with low glazing area is that way to cut costs or for other reasons. But it would surprise me if that was the measure a builder turned to reduce glazing area. So in cases where a home already has 12% or less glazing area, I think this option would be taken as kind of a free rider credit, and no energy would be saved. But this goes a little deeper, and there's a few other reasons why I think this is particularly problematic in an options setting. Because this is a new option to the Oregon Residential Specialty Code that wasn't there before, it could be taking the place of other options that have a history of saving more energy, HVAC efficiency, envelope improvements, and so on. This could also be the only one selected, because rather than require two options, the 2021 ORSC only requires one option. So there's a brand new option that might be selected, and it might be the only measure selected. And we believe that this could result in a net decrease in energy efficiency. And so I think you know, it was well intentioned, and I think I understand, you know, on paper how it can be argued that you know, less glazing area could save energy. But I think in an options context like this, I think that it could actually lead to the opposite and more energy use. And so I would support Zero Coalition's request to have this removed from the 2021 ORSC. And I'll just leave it there. And if anybody has any questions, I'd be happy to answer.
Thank you. Any question for Eric? Let's go to the next, Shilpa.
Good morning, board and chair and board members and chair and the staff of the Building Code Division. I am also in I represent Northwest Energy Efficiency Alliance, and I am supporting Zero Coalition's proposal to remove the Measure 7 from the additional measures table. The 2021 ORSC was approved with few amendments by the RMSP board on October 7th. And the Measure 7 was added in that process. Although reduced window area saves energy, NEA's energy saving analysis also indicates that there are energy savings associated with this measure, but they are substantially less when compared to the other options in the additional measures table. Additionally, since the 2021 Oregon Residential Code reduces the number of options from 2 to 1, Measure 7, if it's selected by a builder in place of another measure, such as a space heating measure, it can bring negative savings and increase energy over the 2017 Oregon Residential Specialty Code. And thus, we request the board to reconsider the proposed 2021 Oregon Residential Specialty Code and eliminate this Measure 7 from the additional measure table. Thank you.
Thanks. Any question from members? Good. Next, Mike.
Thank you, Chair. My name is Mike Goodrich. I am a builder in Oregon. I also work with the OHBA on codes and was a co-chair of the Technical Advisory Committee for the new code adoption. When additional measure 7 came in, it was in addition to the package that had been developed and analyzed by the division. OHBA had been supportive of the division's package there, but we appreciated the opportunity for alternatives for builders and options and creative ways to achieve the energy efficiencies we were all looking for. And so we were in favor of it at that time. We also appreciate the additional analysis that's been taken, and we have no desire whatsoever to reduce the energy efficiencies proposed to be gained by this code. So, in general, OHBA does not object to the removal of this measure, based on it appears to have unanticipated impacts. So, with that, thank you.
Thank you, Mike. Is David Halsam with us today? No, okay. Okay, members. Do you have any discussion of this matter?
To the chair, this is Gordon Anslow. I know that people have heard me voice similar sentiments in the past, but I will say, as somebody that's in the regular business of working with customers, trying to put together houses and struggling mightily to be able to afford to put said houses together in ways that comply with what people want and need, and obviously with all the requirements of state law. I'm speaking in defense of retaining this item number 7. Every house that we have built for quite a long time, we go through as part of the whole design process, we being a design build company, using the online spreadsheet for determining a compliance path. And I just want to chime in and say that the limitation on window area, item number 7, is not just a gimme that nobody modifies their, the way they're going to build a house on account of it. We explain to people how this whole thing works, and that they have trade-offs, and that among the things they can do is that they can limit their window area. You obviously, in the whole energy use equation, have the supply side and the demand side. The window thing has to do with the demand side, which is how much energy is, flowing through your windows and your walls and your ceiling and your roof and all that, energy just going away. And then the supply side being mechanical systems that replace it. This passive side of reducing the window area is something we use all the time, and we explain to people the reason why it's useful. And I guess the other thing I would point out is we work with a lot of older people on limited incomes, although they have enough money to afford a house in Oregon, which is pretty remarkable in the first place these days. But the way a lot of people live in houses, and my wife and I certainly fall in this category, is like in a day like today, our heating system is turned off. We wear sweaters. We only turn it on when the temperature gets down, in the 40s or lower. It is not quite as simple as you might think. But with regard to this item 7, my personal 2 cents here is I would like to see that retained as an option. I think if anybody wants to go through a process to study specific actually built houses and see if it is in fact doing great damage to energy use, I would encourage you to do so. But I at least want to chime in and say that this is not, it is not an item that is just a freebie that builders just take for granted. Those of us who are slogging in the trenches trying to figure out a way that people can afford a house, use it and understand, you know, windows are, the amount of heat that goes out of windows in your house is much more than most people understand, you know, just on a gut level. And to me, it's a significant thing, particularly when you have a population that frequently is not just routinely keeping the thermostat set at 68 or 70 all day long. Older people frequently are trying to save money at every turn and live in cold or cool houses. And, you know, on the supply side, it's not, it may not be quite what you think. Anyway, thanks for listening to my opinion.
Thank you. Ollie, you have something to say?
Yeah, through the chair, I have a couple comments and a question. This is Eli Volum. So I came in here supportive of removing this measure. It's pretty interesting to hear Gordon's points as a designer and builder that he would consider it. My initial thoughts were most builders would not go down to 12% window area, as that's a pretty significant reduction from the average. And we haven't really talked about averages. I'm a little rusty in my energy modeling. It's been a few years, but it seems to me as more like 14 or 15% is probably somewhat the average. And I'd be curious if anyone can chime in on what that is. The zero energy ready home that, you know, is ultimately our target has a penalty if you have more than 15%. So that would suggest that the average might be about 15%. So, you know, I think there, you know, we all know there are energy savings, but we haven't talked about what those are. So, you know, just from the stance that even the best window is a really poor wall from an energy standpoint, I'd be curious to get a better sense about the impacts that we're talking about. And a specific question is, in the analysis, I'm assuming the REM rate models of the different path options, is it an annual energy use that we're looking at, or is it a measured life scenario that we're looking at? Because I would argue that not putting a window there is going to last for the life of that house. You know, going with a lower efficiency furnace, you know, it's going to be the life of that furnace. Maybe it's 20 years, maybe it's 15 for a heat pump, and then it's going to be upgraded. So are we comparing over the entire life of that structure or measure, or are we just looking at an annual basis?
Chair, if this is Gordon Ansel again, can I chime in?
Sure.
I just, right before the meeting, I just pulled out the most recent, literally just the most recent house. We're just about to sign a contract in a day or two with a older couple. That's mostly our customers these days, are empty nesters, downsizing and stuff. And where we went through a process, and their house is a pretty reasonable little 3-bedroom, 2-bathroom, 1-story house, 1,800 square feet. And the window area in that house is right about 10%. And I had conversation with them regarding the role of, you know, the trade-off. I mean, the thing that is fixed in most of these houses is the amount of money people have to spend is largely fixed. Even though money is cheap right now, people at this part in their lives are very much looking at how they're going to keep paying the bills as they advance into old age. And, you know, that this one's at 10%. Others that we have done, probably going back to the next two back, have been like, well, I think one was like 11.4. And if you didn't talk with people about the role of, you know, juggling the window area as part of the calculation that's done on the, you know, the Chapter 11 measures spreadsheet, you know, people say, well, I want big windows all over the place. But when you explain the degree to which heat, you know, flows out of windows, even relatively good windows by, you know, current standards, you know, they go, oh, I see how that works. So it's something we're very careful and sort of quasi-scientific about, putting the windows in areas that do them the most good, get them the most light, and do things to manage the way they get natural light in the house and so forth. But it isn't just a thing that it's just left over in there that nobody uses. We use it all the time. And just to tell you that now we have some people that want to build a very large, expensive house on an incredible view lot, and we know that they're going to ram the window area up to the limit. They paid $400,000 for a lot way up in the hills, and they're going to be a real problem to work with. But most people that we work with are struggling to qualify, to have enough money to build kind of what they need to go forward. And they are actively engaged, and I actively engage them in a discussion of how to go about allocating their money to pay for the various measures that relate to energy conservation. And the limiting of window area is one of the more significant things that you can tweak around. So that's why I'm kind of, me personally, like to stay in there, because it's a tool that gives us flexibility. And every house that we design for people, which is mostly what we do, is custom design houses for folks, we engage them in this, and they come away understanding that there are trade-offs and that they have limitations they have to live within. And so we don't see a lot of normal people saying that they want 20% window area. And if we did, we would tell them that they would that they're going to be paying larger utility bills as a result. Hope that helps.
Go ahead.
To the chair, this is Shilpa Surana from Northwest Energy Efficiency Alliance. Can I just respond to a question which was raised?
Go ahead.
I really respect the idea about what Gordon just stated about affordable housing. NIA's analysis is based on the field study data we collect. In our analysis is based on a medium home size of 2,200 square feet. The affordable homes are in a category of about 1,500 square feet. Since the current code structure doesn't have a sliding scale which adjusts for a home size, I think we should see this in a perspective of the most percentage of the homes and what the medium home size looks like. And based on some of the numbers we ran for a medium home of 2,200 square feet, the impact of choosing this measure over a high efficiency HVAC option can bring negative savings over the 2017 code. And so we ran a 2017 Oregon code model for this prototype, selecting an option one, selecting a higher efficiency furnace. Federal efficiency mandates an AFUE of 80% on a furnace, but choosing that option, you model it with a higher efficiency. And when you compare that option with choosing measure 7, just the limited glazing area option, that actually brings negative savings to the code. I appreciate there are savings which are bound with this measure option, but the code needs to have more options or combinations of options for the builders to pick and choose, so that the overall impact on the energy consumption, annual energy consumption, I am referring to annual energy number here, there's a positive impact on the code. Thank you.
Through the chair, this is Eli again. Just a kind of a follow-up, because I still support moving away from this measure, but I think there is a place for it. I think we've all kind of hearing that as a combination of measures, it makes sense. And so I still want to get to the root of the actual numbers, but it results in negative savings in the modeling now. And is that on an annual basis, or are we looking at measure life impacts?
Shilpa, do you have an answer for that?
Well, our numbers are based on an annual energy consumption ALI for the chosen measure. So, yeah, that's what I would say.
Okay, so thank you. So my final comment then is just that I think if we look at it from another approach, it's going to be, we look at the overall societal benefits and the structure is going to be there for a really long time. If it has less window area, that's likely to persist. I mean, I don't know what the likelihood of people adding windows over time is, but the measure of having an improved envelope because you have more wall area compared to window area is going to save energy over the entire life of that structure. I mean, yeah, the entire life of that measure. I mean, that's just something I would like to look at and consider, and so we understand what the actual numbers are. So I'm not questioning on an annual basis that it's negative savings, but a lot of the things we're looking at make sense over the life of that structure, that measure from a societal benefit. But, we have to balance it with payback for people moving into that house right now, and I completely recognize somebody moving into a house with a more efficient furnace is likely going to have more manageable bills. So I welcome any other thoughts or comments from fellow board members or anyone else on it, but just on an annual snapshot basis, I don't know if that's the right way to be completely evaluating the benefit of this measure.
Well, this is Gordon. Can I make one more comment?
Sure, go
ahead. Anyone that's listened to our discussions on these matters over the years, at least that I've been involved in this board, has heard me say this before, which is, I mean, yesterday I was talking with some people that I think they're quite wealthy. They have I just referred to them. They want to build a 5,000 square foot house. It's a man and his wife. And, it's a free country and they can afford it. And, God bless them. I don't know what they did to get their money, but I'm sure it was, they deserve to have whatever they want. However, essentially the standard for them is the same as for many of the older couples I have frequently with, people in declining health, and they're moving out of an old two-story house and they're looking for a basic place to age in place. Many of them refer to this as their last house. And I have to say that when you are involved on a daily basis in analyzing and helping people through the whole design process and figuring out a compliance strategy and figuring out how you can build a house that people can afford, the fact that there is not a sliding scale, sort of a recognition of, in the interest of allowing in Oregon people to have kind of, a basic essential house that they need to live on their own in a admittedly single family house, which would be much better if they were living in a big apartment somewhere, I suppose. But still, to me, it is a glaring omission that there is not some recognition of a sort of base house, small, more, efficient in that it is, a 1,500 foot house or a 1,700 foot house as opposed to a 5,000 foot house or whatever. And we dance around the compliance thing, but I look at it, and I think if you just went through and did a simple calculation of the amount of energy that it takes to heat your 5,000 foot house, say with the fabulous view and 25% glazing or whatever, compared to a much more efficient smaller house, I kind of feel that there is a sort of a social equity element here that it really isn't particularly addressed. And as a sort of, I wish that Oregon had sort of there's a right to build a house kind of a concept that if you're going to build a small, reasonable place just to fulfill the basic functions of having a place to live, as opposed to building the big spectacular, showboat house. The people that have got massive money that can afford to drop $2 million on a house, I think few people are going to say, hey man, just bring it on. The energy standard should be much higher for that house. That isn't the way things really are set up right now. And I think it's part of what gets people like me kind of worked up about this is that the failure to have something that sort of recognizes some sort of basic right to build an affordable, smaller house versus, extending it up to something really big, kind of perverts the process a bit in a way that it's hard to justify it as saying that the same standard gets applied to whether you're trying to build a 1,200-foot really compact little place for, grandma and grandpa to grow old in versus, a much larger house. Anyway, I yield the floor.
Thanks.
Through the chair.
Go ahead.
This is John Camiller. Why don't we just add a size standard to number 7? Say 1,800 square feet or 1,700 square feet. The smaller you get the house, the harder it is to meet that percentage requirement. If you got a 5,000 square foot house, you got plenty of room inside that house and not nearly as much wall space compared to a tiny house. So why don't we just add a size standard in? I don't know what that size standard should be. That's it.
Through the chair, this is Eli Volum again. I think that's an interesting idea. We all know that we're moving towards the zero energy ready standard, and that does have a size adjustment factor that penalizes large houses, requires them to do more energy efficiency measures. And I believe we might be seeing some proposals along those lines in the REACH code. Might be kind of interesting to entertain throwing in, a modified measure that factors in the size, as was just suggested, along with the produced window area. It would be a nod towards the energy impact of a smaller home and the benefits of building a smaller home from that perspective.
Chair Gordon Ansel just wants to respond and say, I am very much in favor of doing basically exactly that, which is introducing something that takes into account the size of the house, basically, that you're building. However, I just want to chime in and say that this is not something that we should just come up with some wording right now and just throw it in there. It really needs to be studied carefully because it is not as simple a matter that I think it justifies a reasonable study, and I would urge if that study was being done by state staff that they go out in the real world and harvest information on 2 or 3 dozen real houses that are getting built and be careful about it, because this is not, to me, it would be a great step forward, and I think could do a lot of real good, both in reducing total energy use and in helping people to be able to afford reasonable basic housing. But it's the impact is considerable, and it needs to be carefully studied and use real factual information to make sure that you're not just doing something that's got sort of unintended consequences. Thank you.
Yeah, through the chair, Rich Fry.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I would support that also. I think that as a developer and seeing what's being built in the subdivisions that I've done, I think we're talking 50, 75, 100 to 1 that we're building 1,800 square foot houses to 5,000 square foot houses. But I agree that there should be some kind of a sliding scale, and we should get the actual data before we make any kind of an amendment. But I would support a sliding scale.
Okay, Dawn.
Hi there, through the chair. Thank you. Thank you, Chair and Board. As a representative of the Energy Trust of Oregon EPS New Construction Program, but not as one of our technical leads, I'm going to just share some numbers for the measure life consideration as we develop our EPS measure. That factors in the measure life of windows, furnaces, and heat pumps. This is in response to Eli's question. This is the measure life in the EPS new construction program for homes is 45 years, 25 years for gas furnaces and 18 for heat pumps. So not infinite, but the reason that I state that is independent of the analysis that NIA has done. I wanted to just share that when we look at the savings over the life of the homes that will be built to this new code, we see negative market transformation savings. So while the NIA study looks at a single year, our analysis looks at the full measure life of these measures and sees a similar challenge with lost energy savings versus 2017 ORSC as it relates to option 7.
A question for Don. Is this analysis for certain size of the houses, or what's the mean size of the house?
Yeah, through the chair, thank you for that question. Again, I am not the technical lead for our program, but I believe it's in the order of 2,200 square feet, which similar to NIA's analysis. I can get back to you on the exact square footage that we use for our model homes.
And another question: when you say negative, compared to what?
Compared to the 2017 ORSC. So I say that in regards to Energy Trust claims both savings for the Energy Trust EPS new construction program claims savings on a per home basis as EPS homes are built. But there's another way that that Energy Trust gets credited savings, and that's for market transformation, which is applied to subsequent codes for helping shape for contributions in helping prepare the market for future code cycles, for future code advancements. And so as we look out, if a code advances significantly, then the market transformation savings on the gas side, which is what Energy Trust gets to claim for EPS new construction homes, could be significant. If it went backwards, then market transformation would be negative. Of course, for EPS new construction, it would be easier to offer a program if a code doesn't advance very far on the energy side. So this is so I'm providing probably more information than I need to, but I just wanted to provide a context for Eli's question of whether when we look at these measures, the glazing option 7 versus HVAC, over the course of the measure lives, we are seeing a negative effect.
To the chair, this is Eli again. Thanks for sharing that information, Don. That's along the lines of what I was looking for. Just a quick clarification. I suspect that the energy savings associated with that window are associated with that being a better window than what would have otherwise been put there, and not compared to a wall. I think the idea of having energy savings by having wall instead of window is not really a measure that anyone's ever looked at. And that's why I think we want to really understand what the true benefits are. Because that's looking at, you put a window in, you can put in a 0.25 window compared to a 0.30 window. And the measure of life of that window is 45 years. And after 45 years, you're going to put in a better window, presumably. But I don't know that comparison is showing whatever window you put in today versus a wall. Is that correct? And maybe that's a question for Mark or Shilpa too.
Yeah, through the chair. I think I've sufficiently gotten out over my skis here, and to try to explain this any further would be a disservice to all of you. So I'd be happy to request that our technical leads. I'd be happy to be a channel for for further questions to our technical leads.
I just have, just for the information, a question for why the 2,200 square foot, you know, what choosing for energy analysis.
I'm afraid I can't speak to that through the chair. Excuse me.
This is Shilpa here. NIA has used those numbers, and they're based on the field data we collect, new construction field data we collect, and that's the reference.
So the average house we build is 2,200?
Approximately.
Can I chime in and say something on this? This Gordon Anslow. You know, in the current state of affairs with the two measure system, one of the measures is that you use the state provided spreadsheet and plug in the areas of floor, flat roof or flat ceiling, pitch ceilings, gross wall area, window areas, and their U values and door areas. The whole, basically all the envelope information. And then you go through and you can tweak around all kinds of options and come up with something that works, which I'm not sure. I'm actually surprised from my just anecdotal conversation with other builders, and actually even talking with people that work at in city plan check departments, the degree to which that is not how little that seems to be used. But what I just want to say that it absolutely takes into account the qualitative, or I should say quantitative difference between the amount of heat that flows out of a window, even, you know, a compliant window, versus even just a basic 2x6 wall with R21 insulation and all of that. So there is that is recognized, at least in that. That essentially gives you a budget. You know, it basically establishes a budget essentially having to do with your kind of gross size of the house, and you tweak things around in it. So the code does recognize that difference between, you know, windows are basically holes that for the pleasure of looking out them, you let a lot of energy go flowing to the great outdoors. And that is recognized, at least, you know, in that. I think in the current case, though, we don't have this mechanism, the sliding scale kind of mechanism that says that, well, you know, a 1,500 foot house is morally superior to a 6,000 foot house, and therefore they should get a little break. Because if you went through you could go through a calculation and say that this house, as it's being proposed, is going to use up X number of BTUs per hour during, you know, a heating day. And then you could go to the big house and say, and this one is going to use this many BTUs, and the bigger house is going to have a much larger number. And where the kind of moral thing comes into it a little bit is, well, you know, this big house, even though it complies with the code, uses 5 times more energy than this little guy to house maybe the same number of people. And of course, that's the thing which we haven't really dealt with. But, you know, I think personally going forward, I think it is something that, and it's a real pain, and I'm sure that all the state staff people are rolling their eyes heavenward because it's a lot of work, but that it deserves to be looked at and addressed going forward, because as I think we all know, we are officially said to have a housing crisis in this state, and we do have one. And we need to figure out ways that people that need to build more reasonable, you know, sensible, smaller houses to do their essential living functions could stand to catch a break from the way things are currently set up. By the way, I just want to chime in and say I'm sitting here looking out my 98-year-old single glazed windows in my office at the river here. So the lifespan of windows can be considerably more than 45 years, by the way. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. David Halson.
Thank you, Chair Tamerlit. Apologies, I was not able to respond earlier, but I just wanted to give the context of why the Zero Coalition, I'm speaking for the Zero Coalition, made the request to retract Measure 7, and it, as everyone's been speaking about, there was, in the proposal that was put forward this summer by the Zero Coalition to the Code Committee, there was a size adjustment sort of element to that proposal. And in the proposal we put forward, there would have been, most homes would have had to pick 2 measures from the table. And it was only the very small homes that would have only had to pick 1 measure. So the intent of that proposal was still that the vast majority of homes would still do what they do today in terms of they would pick efficient HVAC equipment as their primary method of meeting the requirements of the options table. So without having, as being discussed, without having anything around a size adjustment around picking additional measures, because that element wasn't picked up by the Code Committee and moved forward. Just a couple additional measures, including Measure 7, were sort of picked out of the Zero Coalition proposal. When we later understood what the overall ramifications of that would be, of just adding that to the table without adding in, the size element, we decided it was best to retract, the proposed addition of Measure 7, because unless you add in this consideration of size, then it wasn't providing, the end result that at least the Zero Coalition was promoting by putting that proposal forward in the summertime. So we definitely think that in the future, it would be great to make these considerations, especially within the additional usage of the additional measures table, to take size into account. I think that I've been hearing some really good discussion of that echoes a lot of discussion that, coalition members have, coalition members being like people from city government, builders, architects, nonprofits, very similar conversations about it. But I think that would be a great thing to bring up, in my opinion, as we start looking at the 2023 code and what those debates will look like, and maybe even within debating the REACH code.
Hey, David,
Thank you.
David, what was the size? What was the size that was proposed in your proposal?
Now I'd have to go look it up exactly. I believe it was 1,500 square feet was the small, defined small, and that large was at 3,500 square feet. But we had a lot of debate about the large, and at the last minute, it might have gone to 5,000 square feet. I think we actually tried to stay in alignment with what is done in Washington State, where they actually use this approach with their additional measures table. And I believe they went with 1,500 square feet and 5,000 square feet, but Mark Heiser would probably know more definitively at the moment. I can look that up here.
Hey, Mark, do you have the information?
Chair Tamwell, and the board, yes, I believe it is correct. It came in as 1,500 square feet for the small home and 5,000 for the large. And wanted to just address 2 quick things. One is that, yes, as Gordon noted, there's an ability to trade off window area and wall area and come up with or the quality of those through a spreadsheet. And it's looking at the wall area. So what the code is looked at is, relative to wall area. We noted in the past that through the Energy Trust, there is some data on homes that are built through the Energy Trust program, and I'm sorry that I was trying to find that data, but I believe it's somewhere around 30% of the homes are under the ETO program are being built with 12% or less currently. And that's in ratio to the floor area. And I believe part of that is that when you say you're allowing percentage relative to floor area, a townhome doesn't have as much wall. And so a lot of townhomes were getting below that number. So that would be something for consideration of whether it was the Oregon code is looked at window wall area, you know, the percentage of the wall, not as a percentage of the constructed floor plan. So you can have a constructed floor plan that doesn't have a lot of thermal wall area on them when you get to townhomes and duplexes. So those are the one pieces I can share a little data that we do have and we have been looking at through the years. Thank you.
Okay, any further discussion?
Well, this is Eli Bolam. Just my last thought is I'm still supportive of removing this measure because I just don't think there's enough analysis to show us how much. I mean, the analysis we know is on an annual basis is going backwards, and I think there's potential for this measure, and certainly combined with other measures. So I'd love to see some sort of variation of it in the future, but I don't think we have enough data to really be able to make a solid decision. I mean, I still think there's something to the lifetime benefit of having less windows, but I just want to put out there I'm supportive of removing the measure.
This is Gordon Angelo. I'll try to be very brief. The other thing that I think needs to be said, just so people have the perspective on it, is that when you're talking with people about building a house and spending their money to put something together and come up with a compliance strategy, the payback period that most private individuals who are just looking at housing themselves consider worth putting money into is probably in the 3, 4, 5 year maybe period. Whereas if you are, say, an electric utility and you're looking at how much it costs to generate new electricity and whatnot, maybe you're dealing with 30-year, 40-year payback periods. And the difference between the way that private individuals who are just trying to build a house versus sort of society at large, understanding the need to not, be profligate with energy and waste it. There's a societal benefit in having more efficient housing. Where kind of the rub is, the way things are currently set up, though, that pretty much all the expense falls on the people that are building their individual house. Many people, when you explain this stuff to them and say, yes, and the energy savings are going to pay for themselves in 24 years. And of course, they always say the same thing to me. Well, I'm going to be dead. I don't care. And I'm not just being funny. That's what they say. What we don't have is a thing where society has decided that it is worth stepping up and providing the additional money to subsidize more efficient construction of housing in recognition of the societal benefit of using less energy in general. Right now, the way it kind of works, at least with what we're talking about, which is the code that regulates the way you put together people's housing, is the expense all falls on the individuals. And, I'm probably rather Pollyanna to think that that's going to change, but it is something people should at least have some perspective on, because the way stuff is, what drives the regulatory end of it is really looking at the societal benefit, which is, legitimate. However, the people where the rubber kind of meets the road, the people that are working with the old folks that are just trying to get into a basic house, they, of course, are dealing with their own personal economics, where a payback period, that runs out for decades they have a hard time figuring out why they should do that. So just keep that in mind. Thank you.
Any further discussion? If none, we just have to have a motion. We have three options here, whether to remove it, keep it with some amendment, or just decline the change of the table.
Well, this is Gordon. I suppose it falls on me to say, me personally, I would move to decline to make any change to the table in 1101.1 parenthesis 2.
Through the chair, Rich Fry, I'd support that until we have further documentation that gives us a little better insight.
Okay.
Through the chair, this is John Cameller. I support that as well.
Any further discussion? Okay, if there is no further discussion, I'll ask Melissa to call the roll, I guess. Or
really quickly, Mr. Chair, sorry, this is Andy Bolton, policy analyst at the division. I just want to make sure that any motions we're making are being made with the finding that the added cost, if any, is necessary to the health and safety of the occupants or the public, or necessary to conserve scarce resources.
What he said. Should I say that? My motion is to decline to make any changes to table in 1101.1 parenthesis 2 with the finding that the added cost, if any, is necessary to the health and safety of the occupants or the public, or necessary to conserve scarce resources.
And again, I second that, Rich Fry.
any further discussion? Okay, I think it's Tony. Andy, is the one who's going to call the roll?
Sure, I can. Gordon Anslow.
I'm in favor of it.
James Austin, if he's here, I don't think he is. Oh, wait.
I am.
Sorry, James.
I am here and I support.
Okay. Forrest Barnes.
I support.
John Cameller.
Yes.
Rich Fry.
Yes.
Emily Kemper.
No.
Douglas Leppin.
In favor of.
Rich Tovar.
Yes.
Eli Volum.
Not in favor.
Sherry by Tamara Hule.
Not in favor.
And Mr. Chair, we have 7 ayes and 3 noes.
So it's denied. We're going to keep the table as it is. Mark. Okay. We move on to the next item, is announcement. Do you have any announcement? None?
Through the chair, this is John Cameller. I tried. Are you recognizing me?
I think I was talking. I thought about. The question was to Mark. Do you have anything to say?
No, sir. Nothing else from the division at this point.
Say it again.
No comments from the division. We will just look forward to, continue with our work on the publication at this point.
Thank you.
Excuse me, Mr. Chair, this is Mike Moore, and I submitted a request to testify today under item number 7. was told I could have 5 minutes.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Yes, the comment that I submitted and the testimony that I'd like to provide is related to item number 8 on the additional measures table. And basically, if the committee members can refer to the document that I provided, what I'm trying to do with that comment is to just clarify how to apply the latest changes, in addition to this table of this measure. It's not very clear at this point how the performance metric should be used, or what performance metrics should be used for verifying recovery efficiency. And I represent, I'm from a company, Stater LLC. I represent Brown Newtone, a manufacturer, and they get a lot of questions from specifiers, from builders, from code officials as well, regarding what efficiency metrics should be used and how to interpret code requirements related to HERVs. And so the change that I've proposed would just be one to clarify, first off, clarify what metrics should be used and how to determine compliance. And so hopefully this will reduce a lot of the burden for performance verification on both code officials and specifiers and builders. The other thing that this proposed change would do is just correct an oversight that omitted a minimum fan performance rating from being used in the current code. So right now in section N1105.5, there are fan performance requirements for ventilation systems, but in the sausage that gets made through this process, Oregon, I believe, might have started out with the 2018 IRC that had requirements for HERV fan performance, but since then those have been dropped and there are no fan performance requirements for HRVs. So this would reestablish the minimum 2018 IRC fan performance requirement for HRVs when used to comply with this path, and that's at 1.2 CFM per watt. The last thing that this proposed change would do is provide an alternative path for equivalent performance for an HRV that has higher fan performance but slightly lower recovery efficiency. And the reason for this is to encourage affordability and greater selection, as well as to ensure that, hey, we're getting the same performance. And I showed that through the last page based on energy simulations, building energy simulations that were conducted with input from NEA. So just wanted to submit this to the committee for their consideration. Hopefully you can see it as a clarification of the code requirements. It'll help with enforcement and also provide, excuse me, additional compliance options that provide equivalent performance. So thanks for your consideration, and I'm happy to answer any questions you might have.
Thank you. I don't know. I don't have all this information that, you know, it's not in our agenda. Hey, Andy.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. If the board would like to add this as a future agenda item, they could do so. It would not be able to be addressed prior to the planned filing of the code adoption rule next week, but it could potentially be addressed as an interim amendment in the future.
Okay.
Through the chair, is Eli again. I would like to point out this was submitted as written testimony prior to the meeting, and I have a question for Mark Heiser through the chair regarding a comment about the fan efficacy, and if that was intentionally dropped or if that was overlooked. You know, I think that HRVs, ultimately, that's a target in the zero energy ready home as well, and they have a fan efficacy as well as the heat recovery efficiency, and they do stick with the sensible recovery efficiency and not the apparent. So do you have any comments about the CFM per watts and why that is not included in the current version?
Through the chair, Mark Heiser with Division. Yes, Eli, the Division, the language we had for mandatory efficiency when a HRV was going to be brought in as part of the prescriptive home We had been working on that language, but that was deleted, and the only language remaining is what's in the modified or the added measure number 8 that was put forward by the Zero Coalition. And so we did not have a chance to do any modifications on that portion from staff. It was part of so the only portion really is remaining in the Zero Coalition's additional measure number 8 that they added. So that was why we didn't have much, we did not have sufficient time to be able to review that piece and make a modification. Thank you.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. And there have been no further business. Residential and manufactured structural.
Wait. Hey, Remy.
Yes.
I've sent, through the chair, I've sent emails to the staff people. You just went right by me. I want to talk about the paragraph or the chapter 1 stuff, and I've been trying to make the comments. Can we go back and talk about that?
Well, it was not included in the agenda. Is Tony?
You mean
Tony Rocco? Because there is no action on the you know, the reports for the chapter 1 or the rich code, just information for the board. So go ahead if you have.
And I want to make it new business. Then I'd like to make it new business. I tried to interject, and you didn't recognize me. I've sent 3 emails to the administrative people, and they sent you an email, and I want to make a comment.
Tony, go ahead. Go ahead and make your comment.
So in 101.2.2, which is talking about retaining walls, I'd like to know the logic behind putting this additional, very restrictive measures, and then I'd like to explain why I think they're restrictive. It basically says if you're doing a landscape wall that's 4 feet from the footing, there are plenty of landscape walls that require a foot, mechanically, an MSE wall would require about a foot buried, so the bottom would be a foot below, and you'd have a 3-foot wall, and you have to have a permit for it. That seems to be a real extension of the building permit system that's totally unnecessary. And while there might be some places in the state where they've had some problems, here in Southern Oregon, we see road cuts really often that are 1-to-1 slope, and you're talking about anything that has a 3-to-1 slope behind it on a fill. We regularly build fills at 1-to-1 or a little bit flatter, 1.5-to-1, say. And then if you have a fill between a lot and you want to widen it, they build a 4-foot garden wall, and now you're talking about needing a permit. I just think it's totally unnecessary. So I'd like some explanation from the division as to why they think this addition is important.
If I may, Mr. Chairman.
Go
ahead. Through the chair, Tony Rocco with the division, for the record. Thank you, Mr. Camiller, for the question. So just so I understand the question, the intention is of the section in question is to not require permits for any retaining walls that are not providing safeguards for the users of buildings. So that would be in alignment with our long-standing statewide interpretation that is available on our webpage. The language that you're questioning, which is a very good question, is about the local ability to extend local regulation to these retaining walls that are not regulated statewide. The specific concern about non-soil surcharges and ascending backfills was feedback that we received as I walked through our interaction and discussions with our local government partners previously, and that was something that is requested, but was requested at that time to be added in. And that's the reason why it was added in as part of that process. So one, it was not a division recommended addition. It was something that we added to the draft based on feedback received from our local government partners. And two, the provision, we have to read the context of the scoping charging language first, which tells us that this only is saying a local municipality may consider locally to go through a process to require a permit for that, as it previously existed for many, many iterations in the code in section R105.2. I hope that helps. Thank you.
Well, it does explain the logic behind putting it in there. I just disagree with it, and I don't think the understanding, first of all, the wording of it, when measured from the bottom of the footing, there are some landscape walls that you might choose to construct out of mechanically stabilized earth, where you use grids to interlock in the wall, and they generally require a 1 foot buried footing. So now you're talking about a wall that's 3 feet high. I'm sorry, I can't imagine why the division is worried about a wall that doesn't protect the structure and is 3 feet high. I mean, it just seems to me to be just more ways to regulate things that are just going to, in order to get a permit, you're going to have a design for the wall, which is going to take away all kinds of existing materials, all of which are designed to add up to an even foot. So I just think everything after the 4 feet or less in height, everything there should be stricken. I don't, if a local agency wants to put in a requirement in their development code that there be a geotechnical investigations and stuff for their fills and the treatment of fills, which is what you're talking about, then that's something that is allowed anyway. And I just think having to get a building permit for something that for years and years and years has been basically something that the landscaper can do and doesn't require a permit. I just think it's adding more cost to what Gordon is talking about, because you're going to have an engineer to design it, because the building officials aren't going to buy off on it unless it's designed by an engineer. And the engineers can't design something that isn't mechanically stabilized earth. It's just the stacked block walls, and you're just adding cost, I think, for almost no protection.
I thought the height of in the code that it says 4 feet or less is measured to the foundation, to the base of the foundation. That's the definition.
It is.
So
it is, Rebbe. It is, but in several, you don't have to have an engineer design a 4 foot high retaining wall that uses mechanically stabilized earth, and many of those systems require that you have a buried foundation underneath it. So you're not measuring along the face of the unretained face of the wall. You're measuring from the bottom of the foundation. So in some cases, you'd have a 3 foot high wall that has to be permitted, and so that's an issue. And the 3-to-1 slope seems ridiculously flat, at least in our jurisdictions down in Southern Oregon. And I just think that language needs to be taken out because I think it is just going to add cost and complication to something that a homeowner can do along his driveway.
Well, I'll tell you the truth, we have most of the complaints and problems are coming from landscape and this retaining wall that are not really attached to the building, and but they are not, they're not permitted, and they end up having a problem by fading, and we get involved in these cases many times, and that's why I think the state is letting local jurisdiction to come up with their own approach to the retaining wall that are not providing life safety to the building.
I guess my response to that is you don't get involved when the paint fails or when the heating system fails, because those are issues between the homeowner and the contractor. I just don't understand. This has nothing to do with safety or structural safety or life safety. If this is just making the building official's life easier, I don't think it belongs in the code.
Well, there are many cases where, they think that it's not providing any stability to the house, but in fact it does. When it fails, you lose the loft protection of the building, and we don't get involved in the paint, but in the case where you have this kind of retaining walls, we end up getting in the middle of it because it becomes like a compliance issue.
Well, there's other sections in the code that require that the structure be a certain distance away from the toe of a ascending fill, and that provision keeps the structure, which is what we're supposed to be about. That keeps the structure sufficiently far from the slope of the hill, based on the height of the fill. I just don't see the need for this. This is just more regulation.
I think what the state is trying to do is getting out of that retaining wall that's not attached to the building, and that's what's in there. So, Tony, do you have any comment?
I do. Thank you, Mr. Tony Rocco with the division for the record. Just to clarify a couple of things here. So the way that the charging language in 10121 works is that this is saying statewide, none of these retaining walls that are being discussed would be regulated except where a local municipality, through their local policymakers, chooses to adopt a local ordinance that addresses these specific retaining walls in the comment there. The comment was received again from a local building official to be added in their ability to consider local municipal ordinance. So I just want to clarify that. From our position, a landscape retaining wall is not regulated. However, there's some flexibility for local policymakers to make those community-specific decisions of the retaining wall. And I understand your comments, Mr. Camiller, and appreciate those. And I think that's the type of feedback that that our division's looking for. So thank you.
Mr. Gordon, I'm going to make a quick comment to the chair. As someone that's designed hundreds of retaining walls over the years, although I'm not a structural engineer, I worked for one for a long time and have done every kind there is probably. This section has always struck me that what I wish it said was that they regulated the height, the finished grade height between the grade on the low side of the wall to the grade in the high side of the wall. The different systems that you put together, you know, go different distances down below the lower grade. And as someone that also has studied, you know, all kinds of earth issues and landslide problems for a long, long time, that differential between the retained upper surface and the lower surface, which is basically abutting and sort of buttressing the bottom part of the wall, is one thing. And then obviously the other thing is whether or not you have, you know, what the grade is doing at the top of it. But the way it is right now, where you measure from the bottom of the footing, has always struck me as excessively restrictive. And the real issue is, as soon as you decide that I need a wall to address a grade differential that I need to make happen somewhere between here's this lower grade and the higher grade, that the really operative thing that you're really designing to is what is the effective height that you're retaining above that lower grade. So this is where you obviously should talk to soils engineers and, you know, have some suggestions about how to word it. But right now, where you kind of, it has the effect of sort of penalizing using retaining walls that have footings, like whether it's concrete or block, which I think is too bad, because actually those are often pretty stable walls, maybe more so than your typical happy homeowner who goes down to Home Depot and buys a bunch of stack 'em up blocks and stacks them up. So, you know, I think you could stand to have a review of what's really the critical height measurement on these things. And then obviously, if you have, you know, you also need to look at surcharges on the top, and if you have what the slope is, that's, you know, the surcharge slope that's coming down to the top of the wall. But that could be improved on, in my view. Thank you.
Through the chair, the happy homeowner ought to be able to do some things on his property, and a 4-foot wall seems to be a reasonable threshold for evaluation. If a 4-foot wall falls down, it's not going to hurt anything, because you can't build a structure close enough to that 4-foot wall for it to be affected. So I just don't see where it has a place in the code. The code is not to make the building official's life easier. It's to protect the public. And because building officials have been perhaps queried about this issue by a homeowner whose garden wall failed, or usually through poor construction failed, that if it's outside of it's no different than if the tree died that the landscaper put in. I just don't see where this becomes a building code issue. And then who is going to be able to build it? Is this going to fall under the landscape board or the residential structures? I mean, is the residential contractor going to be able to build it, or does it have to be a landscape contractor? I just think you ought to take everything out of that after the 4 feet or less in height, comma, take everything out of that right there, because I don't think it belongs in the code. And when we get to this point, I'll object to it again.
We don't have any motion for this case, but I think Building Codes Division takes your consideration and
thank you.
Okay.
Through the chair, Rich Fry, can we make this a future agenda item so that we come back to this and have the discussion? I'm sorry, did everybody hear me?
Yes, we did.
Yeah.
Okay.
Through the chair, this is Shilpa Surana from Northwest Energy Efficiency Alliance. I also submitted a written testimony on the requesting an amendment to the section M1505.4.1 of Chapter 11 of the proposed 2021 ORSC.
Well, it is not in the agenda of this meeting, you know, we may put it for the next meeting.
Now, this is Eli, through the chair. I guess it was submitted as written comments prior to the meeting, so I guess I can just address it. And first off, like all our meetings, I value and appreciate the public comments. And I guess I'd throw it out there to see if any other board members had any thoughts about Nia's comments that Shilpa provided about the system design on the supply fan. I'll just share my thoughts. I thought it makes sense to point out that if there is a supply fan integrated with the central heating system, that it not be interlocked with the furnace fan. The proposed language that it should not be interlocked, that doesn't really have any teeth, and I don't know if it offers a lot of benefit. In general, the conversations we had about ventilation from the code committee or the appointed volunteer committee, it sounded like it was. Well, I watched that one. It was a long conversation. I think Mike Goodrich said everyone left the meeting not quite sure what they talked about. We talked about it at the board meeting. We were a little confused about it. I think where we're at is we're moving towards having mechanical ventilation. I think we're going to need to rely on lots of organizations, Building Codes Division, NIA, Oregon Home Builders, utility programs to help industry put in solutions that make sense. And I don't know if we, as a board, want to discuss putting in further language about not interlocking a separate supply fan with a furnace fan. I think we want to be careful about adding language. Keep it open to put good solutions in. I don't know that we want to be hasty about trying to modify it and potentially narrow how somebody should do. But I wholeheartedly agree if there's a separate supply fan introducing air to the central system, that a builder should be aware that it's a big energy penalty if they're also running the central furnace fan. However, running the central furnace fan on its own could be a good strategy. I don't know that we want to prevent that. I mean, that's a very common strategy that's been used the utility programs intermittently, not 24 hours a day, on a time schedule. So I'd welcome any Mark Heiser might have or anyone else on the board about this.
Can I just respond to your statement, Eli? Our understanding is if you run central furnace fan to distribute airflow through to meet the balanced ventilation requirements, this would add energy penalty, as the code language doesn't explicitly preclude you not to use furnace fan. So from the energy perspective, there is negative impact there. I do want that to be acknowledged here.
This is Eli. I'd welcome comments from Mark or anyone else, but the strategy with the furnace fan is you might be introducing a whole lot more air than what you need for 24 hours, so you can do it intermittently. So you might be bringing in 100 CFM and distributing it throughout the house, and you might only need to run it 25% of the time, as opposed to the house might be required to put 30 CFM into it. So that's where using the furnace fan, and that's hopefully it has an electrically commutated motor, so it's more efficient. But it's a strategy that has been used quite a few, hundreds, if not thousands, of above code programs over the years. So yeah, I guess I'd welcome comments from guys or anyone else that has any thoughts about it.
Hey, Mark.
Through the chair. So when what has been passed is a requirement for a whole house ventilation system with mechanical supply and mechanical exhaust, the baseline requirement is to run, so the baseline code is for a supply fan that's blowing in, that runs 24/7, 365 days a year, that's interlocked with a exhaust fan that's moving, say for our typical home, somewhere around 60 to 75 CFM out of the home. Those two fans are to have under the whole house ventilation requirement, there is a switch that's required to allow the homeowner to shut the system down. So this is the whole house ventilation system. There is, and I would like to have to bring up my code document here. As noted in the past, for a whole house ventilation system, an ability to, shall we say, oversupply. Essentially, if you wanted to run 15 minutes out of every hour, you could run 4 times that amount of air through the home. But it would be that 4 times that amount would have to be not only pumped in, but exhausted at the same time. So you would have to put in, say for that 60 CFM home, if you wanted to run a fan to bring in, get my 240 CFM of supply air for the ventilation, there would have to be a 240 CFM exhaust fan that was interlocked with the supply fan. So the furnace method, and also would have to have a switch that would be able to turn the system off when not desired. We're based on the conversations, we were trying to make it so that yes, it could be the supply air running 24/7 could be put into the return air of the furnace. So that would also help distribute it. And but that was just one note in the code. So after the modifications from the board, the current baseline code is to provide a supply inline fan, which would be an Energy Star efficiency, to put for the baseline home, let's say 70 CFM 24/7, 365 days a year, and an equivalent 70 CFM fan is needed to exhaust that 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. The use of the furnace in order to meet the balanced ventilation methodology would require a system that when you cycled during ventilation mode would have to pull in something like 250 CFM. So open up a special damper, turn on the furnace and cycle it, but also cycle a balanced exhaust fan of approximately 250 CFM. So we're not seeing how the furnace cycling is sort of a separate system now. It is a independent fan blowing in and an independent fan that is being exhausted per what was the final product once the requirement for distributed ventilation, or the allowance for distributed ventilation, when that was removed from the division proposal, the use of the furnace is very hard to do now.
Thank you for that clarification, Mark. So that just cleared up my understanding. So the way you just framed it, it sounds like nobody will run the furnace fan because they're going to have to also supply a massive exhaust fan to meet the balanced requirement.
That is correct. And that there's also the possibility of, there's the requirement to have a sort of a disable for when you're going on vacation. If you disable the furnace fan, that would lead to other issues and problems. So unlikely to ever be used now.
I just have a comment here. Can this be clarified? So Mark,
Yes.
what you suggested, that this technique is not acceptable and is not a possibility, maybe it's not clear to the industry yet, because from our conversations and the way we ran our analysis, we assumed this could be a possible scenario.
We can provide, we were intending on having, during our code training, to show how the systems work and what's intended and what's allowed under the code, and what the new requirements are. And if there's additional clarification for the general public, we can investigate what we can do to put that out. Yes, the code guide might be helpful given some of the understandings we're hearing today.
Any further discussion? Andy?
Yes, Chair.
These items were not in the agenda. Is it, what's the role for that?
Because they're not in the agenda, they would need to be noticed before we can do a motion and vote on them. So it would have to be added to the agenda of a future meeting.
Okay. Okay, thanks. Well, gentlemen, ladies and gentlemen, if there is no other business and there is no further business, residential and manufactured structure board meeting is now adjourned at 11:25. Thank you and have a good day.